This is ERC Sundays, the messages at Emmaus Road Church in DeWitt, Iowa. ERC is a church of people striving to grow in Jesus and make him known to others through our faith, words, and actions. Find out more about our church at emmausroadonline.org. Here's this week's message.
We've come to the second to last week in our, what I would call, abbreviated series on the Gospel of John. And so last week, Pastor Matt, he gave a really important message that we ought to take pretty seriously. And this message was based off of the prayer that Jesus gives not long before he's arrested and taken to trial. And his prayer for his believers is that the thrust of that is that we would be unified. That we would be unified. That we would care deeply about one another, that we would use that sense of love and grace and mercy that he gave to us, and we would spread that out. That would be kind of the heartbeat of his church, is unity. And here's the thing. We need to take that message really seriously. And so if we don't take that message of unity really seriously, what happens is we start with disagreements about silly things that don't really matter, and then we kind of become disenfranchised with the whole church thing, and eventually we just disband. See what I did there with the DDD? Pastors love that stuff. But it's true. That's how it works. And so Jesus, knowing that at the very heart of the gospel is love and forgiveness and peace. And he wants that so badly for his church. And so it's an important thing that we have to lift up, because, you know, while the rest of the world honestly has been doing a lot of us versus them stuff lately, the church needs to look markedly different. It really does. We can't look like the rest of the world and still call ourselves the church. Now, I will say on this topic of unity, every once in a while, there is moments where, like, unity is a bad thing. And you might be saying, well, that's crazy because Matt just spent 25 minutes talking about it as a great thing last week. Here's how it can go really bad. Sometimes we can unify under a banner of stupidity. Or we can unify under a banner of violence. Or we can unify under a banner of hate. Those are things that gain traction, and people unify under those things. And it's unfortunate. And you might actually use like the phrase like, okay, so the older phrase like the blind leading the blind. That's what happens. Sometimes people unify and it creates a mob mentality. Well, inside of that mob mentality, and there's so many examples. Inside that, there's so many examples, and you could probably list dozens of them just throughout recent U.S. history. But inside a mob mentality, what happens is we get into this weird groupthink moment, and we lose all reason, and we lose logic, and ultimately we lose justice. We just completely lose sight of what real justice is and what the truth is. And so unity in the wrong sense can go very, very bad. And so I want to, as we continue in the book of John this morning, I want to make sure that is still kind of in the forefront of our minds. Because if this is the last big prayer that Jesus has for us, then, man, we need to really carry that forward and think that through. And I'll tell you what, the text this morning, it brings that to bear in a couple different ways. It's subtle, but it still brings it to bear. And so that's why I wanted to open up with that this morning, is because I just need that in the back of your heads as we read this text. So let's read. We are going to read John. We're in John chapter 18. I don't know if you're phone people, if you need to get that out. But we're in John chapter 18. And we are going to read verses 28 through 40. Just to give you a very quick background, so Jesus had his, what we call the high priestly prayer. In the meantime, between that prayer and right now, what happens is Jesus goes to the Garden of Gethsemane and he prays and he gets arrested, and Peter tries to chop a guy's ear off, and it gets weird. It gets really weird. And then in the meantime, before what we're about to read, there is a overnight secret trial. During that secret trial, Jesus is beat and he is mocked by the religious leaders of his day, and it just goes really bad. They keep him up all night interrogating him. And even in their own society, highly illegal. Because think about it, when we are being accused of something on a very civil level, we go to court and we get to sit before a jury of our peers. Where do you think we got that? Where do you think we got that? We got that from a Judeo-Christian background. That's where that comes from. Little U.S. history for you. And so what they're doing to Jesus in this middle of the night trial, it's highly illegal, even in their own culture. But they're doing it anyway because they have to have this guy eliminated. So that's kind of the background. But let's catch us up because now we're in the moment where they bring Jesus before the Roman governor Pontius Pilate. Okay? We read this in Jesus' name because it is his word and his life. Then they led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters. It was early in the morning, right around 6 a.m., by the way. They themselves did not enter the governor's headquarters so that they would not be defiled, but could eat the Passover. So Pilate went outside to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered him, "If this man were not doing evil, we would not have delivered him over to you." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." The Jews said to him, "It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death." This was to fulfill the word that Jesus had spoken to show by what kind of death he was going to die. So Pilate entered his headquarters again and called Jesus and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you say this of your own accord, or did others say it to you about me?" Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and chief priests have delivered you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not from the world." Then Pilate said to him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I'm a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" After he said this, he went back outside to the Jews and told them, "I find no guilt in him. But you have a custom that I should release one man for you at the Passover. So do you want me to release the king of the Jews?" They cried out again, "No, not this man, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was an insurrectionist. Here ends the reading of God's word. This morning I would like to kind of bottle up this story or this moment in Jesus' life by kind of following through the text in three pretty simple ways. I think here we get a pretty important and pretty clear picture of where religion can go wrong. I think that's an important thing that we have to pay attention to, and it's right here in the text, and I'm going to show it to you. We also, we got to talk about the king that really nobody wanted, and then finally, we're going to talk about when the guilty is found innocent. So, with that kind of in mind, let's get going. I'll tell you what. I'm pretty sensitive. I'm pretty sensitive to what non-believers think. Not in the way that they can convince me or they can talk me out of my faith, but I like to hear their arguments. And one of the things that a lot of secular atheist people will say is that, the world doesn't need religion. It doesn't need the church. And I hear that. But I also say, even if I wasn't a believer, has the church or religion as a whole, has it made practical, important steps in human history to actually help and guide the world into a better place? Well, I did some research and I came up with just a few examples. So if you're kind of into the apologetics thing, you like talking to people who challenge you, man, here's a short list of things that are actually pretty helpful to know on a very simple, probably not very important scale, but it matters to people who are of a secular mind. Churches or religious groups work and contribute $1.2 trillion a year to the gross domestic product. That's an important thing. So like if you're very economy minded, you could say, man, what happened if there was no religion? We would have a major economic issue. Or you could note the fact that 65% of the people who regularly attend religious services give to charitable organizations regularly. We compare that next to the 56% of people who don't, who contribute. Now, that's not a huge gap, it's 9%, but it still matters, right? People who regularly attend religious services live about 7 years longer. Yeah, that's fun, isn't it? By the way, if you want any of my sources, I'll give them to you, but I didn't put them all up here because it would fill like 5 slides. But that's cool, right? Here's one that I really liked, especially as a former teacher and now as a pastor who works with kids. Kids who regularly attend church services with parents have better self-control, social skills, and approaches to learning than those who don't. Man, bring your kids to church. Bring them on Wednesday. Yeah. He said, I'm going to be smart. Facts. #facts. I think you're already there. Now, those are all kind of like individual things, right? But like, does religion in general give us like a better life, societally speaking, like big picture stuff? I think it does. Notice that, and I've known this for a long time, but like foster care systems, that was started by Christians. Hospital systems, also started by Christians, both in Europe and here, Africa, et cetera, et cetera. Slavery, what was the poking stick that got that movement going to end slavery? Christians. It was their understanding of the Bible. Martin Luther King Jr., a Christian pastor. When there was segregation running rampant through our country, making some people less than, it was his biblical understanding that drove him to peaceful resistance against that. Right? So I'm going to tell you some things in just a second where religion goes wrong, and it's important to note those things, but I'm also telling you at the same time, man, our world is infinitely worse off without people of faith, right? So here's something that can happen, and I'm going to point out 3 things. When they bring Jesus to Pilate, they bring him in there, but they only go so far. I wonder if they just kind of like kick him the rest of the way towards Pilate's house, because like quite frankly, they don't want to get too close, because if they get too close to that Gentile, they'll be defiled. You know what defiled means? It means stained. So in other words, man, religion can go really wrong when we, as religious people, look at other people and say, oh, they're kind of yucky. I mean, I'm just generally better than them. I mean, not a lot of people say that out loud, but people think it, right? And I'll tell you what, as a young person, one of the reasons why I really had a bad taste of Christianity and the church in my mouth, and I really did, was because the couple Christians that I knew, man, were they jerks. I'm not lying. They were terrible. Just this air of superiority. It was overwhelming. And I just, man, if there's anything that will ever take people and move them away from Jesus, it's Christians with their noses in the air. And this is what's happening in this moment, right? God forbid I get too close to one of those yucky unbelievers. You know, it's important to notice that, like, man, Christianity does not happen in a bubble. It does not happen in a vacuum. I'm telling you right now, if Christianity for you is only what happens here on Sunday morning, you've made a major mistake, and I don't think you understand what you're supposed to believe. Christianity needs to be out there, and it needs to be with people, even people who don't dress, act, or look the same way we do. Don't vote the same way. It doesn't matter. Christianity, the Bible itself, does not allow for an attitude of superiority. And you want to know why? Because if you read your Bible and you understand it, what you'll understand is that you are a wretched sinner. You yourself are stained. You yourself are filthy and covered with the very thing that God hates. Yet, that doesn't define you, because you know who Jesus is, and you know that he covered you. You know that instead of the stained clothing that you should be wearing, he's covered you in white robes of righteousness. And when God looks at you, he sees Jesus. It's a beautiful thing. But man, we have to understand that this sense of superiority, it doesn't work, and it's not biblical. A second thing where religion tends to go wrong, I'm glad we're kind of through the major political season, because one of the things that I really struggle with is what experts, public speaking experts, call pivoting. Do you know what pivoting is? There's this great example I found. It's this funny moment, and I watched the video. It's remarkably good, but it just drove me nuts at the same time. In 2004, George Bush was running for office, and somebody asked him, hey, what do you say to the person who just lost, economy, big deal, right? What do you say to the person who just lost their job because the factory that was in America got moved over to another country, and you lost your job to somebody who's making, pennies for what you should be getting a good wage for? Man, this guy was slick. I don't know if you remember him, but I watched that video, and in a sentence and a half, he twisted from talking about, what you should say to that person who's really upset about the economy and jobs going overseas. And he somehow pivoted into a long 2.5-minute talk about education reform. It was remarkable. It was almost seamless. And the thing is, we see kind of a moment like that happening with Jesus. Pilate's like, what did this guy do? Why are you knocking at my door at 6 a.m.? What do you want from me? And he asks these questions, and they totally pivot and they dodge it. Like they're really adept at this. And they say, if this man were not doing evil, we would not have delivered him over to you. Do you hear a reason in there? Do you hear any logical conclusion? Oh my gosh. Pretty slick, isn't it? Pretty slick. They answer the question without ever answering the question. They bring no charge against him. And here's the thing. Sometimes religious people, we can do that too. And you know what? You know why I think we do that? Because we're too afraid to say, I don't know. We're just too afraid of it. I've talked to any number of, some of you, in fact, and other Christians across the Midwest and places I've lived. And you know what the number one reason they tell me that they don't have conversations about their faith is? Well, what if I don't know what to say? What if they challenge me and I don't know what to say? Say, I don't know. Just be honest. Just be honest. And you know what? I'm going to give you a pro tip here. When you say, I don't know, that gives you an opportunity for follow-up. Because you say, you know what? That's a great question. That's a great point. I don't really know. I'm not going to talk in circles around you. Instead, let me go do some research, and can we meet up for coffee in 3 days and keep talking about this? Oh my gosh, what a gift. What a gift to continue a conversation with somebody who's questioning, who wants answers about faith and about Jesus. What a gift. Don't throw away the gift. It's important. Don't throw it away, and certainly don't talk around it. Just be honest. If they were honest, you know what would have happened here? They would have had to say, well, this Jesus guy, he's been healing people, and he's been saving people, and he's been bringing people back from the dead, and he's just really getting on our nerves because he's taking away our power. Pilate would have looked at them, oh my gosh, 6 a.m., I would have sent the army after them. There's no way. They can't possibly be honest. They have to talk in circles, otherwise it doesn't work. Third thing that religion sometimes gets wrong. Control is important. Or at least The early European church thought so. You know which nation is currently struggling with Christianity more than any other nation on the planet? It's actually kind of declining. Europe. Africa, Asia, even America. You can find studies that show that Christianity is increasing in America again. It's struggling in Europe. Why? Because the state and the church became one, and they used political power to try to force people to believe in Jesus. And today we still see the results of that. And here, what we're seeing is they're using the state to do their dirty work. When they say it's not lawful for us to put anyone to death, they're telling him, we haven't told you why he's guilty yet, but we still want him dead. And because of the laws of the land, we're not allowed to do it. Because, see, the thing is, Rome had a solid hold on Israel at that moment, and they weren't allowed to exercise that level of authority to put somebody to death. That was Rome's job. And so when they say it's not lawful for us to put anyone to death, they are conceding a little bit. But really what they're doing is they're combining politics and faith, and it doesn't work. I mean, it works to their end for evil, but it doesn't work. We have to be so careful. We have to be so careful as the church not to control. I don't know if you've ever been, but I'm aware, I have met people who tell me, and I can't believe it, but they tell me, hey, how much do I have to give every week to come here? I have a major issue with that question. What has happened to them? Who has tried to control them? Who has tried to manipulate them into doing something out of compulsion rather than doing it because, man, God is stirring in your heart? Who has done that to them? It breaks my heart that a supposedly Christian organization, somebody who calls on the name of Jesus, would try to control and force things in that way. It's heartbreaking. It's a problem. Christianity is not about controlling. Christianity is about letting go. Letting go, because Jesus has already done everything we need. He is the great supplier of all of our needs. And quite frankly, if God wanted to dump $2 million down on this building, he would do it in a second. But he wants you involved. That's why we talk about it, right? Because he wants you involved. He wants you to be a part of that mission. But he could do it in a second. He owns everything. It's all his anyway. Well, we could talk about, where religion can go wrong all day, but let's kind of keep moving forward here. The interesting thing that we see about Jesus in this moment too is that he is clearly a king. He tells Pilate, yeah, I'm a king, not of this world. And quite frankly, he's really a king that they didn't want. So we understand there's this really interesting moment not long before this. Jesus is hanging out in the temple, and they're trying to question him, they're trying to corner him, and they say, hey, should we pay taxes to Caesar? Should we do that? Why would they ask that question? Well, again, Rome has their boots squarely on their head by force, right? And so they're trying to see if they can get Jesus to say, yeah, you know what? Those filthy, dirty Romans, we don't owe them a thing. Don't pay it. Which would make Jesus an insurrectionist, right? It would make him rebelling against the state. Well, what does Jesus do? Jesus says, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God what is God's. What a remarkable statement. Have you thought about that? Have you thought about how the thing that we want Jesus to be, the king that we want him to be, is the king who will just come in and take care of all of the problems by force? You see, Jesus wasn't a rebel king. He wasn't going to be King David who came in on a horse and rallied the 200, 300, 400,000 people of Israel to say, you know what, enough of this, we are going to squash them. That's not the kind of king he was. It's probably the kind of king they wanted. And in fact, I'm guessing that the religious leaders of Jesus' day, had he come in that way, had he come by force, they'd been like, yeah, put me rank 1, 2, 3, 4 on your priest scale. Yes, let's do this. But that's not who Jesus is it? It's not who he is at all. But I think we want that from him. I think the other kind of thing that we sometimes want from Jesus is we want Jesus to vote like us. We really do. We imagine Jesus hanging out on the right. Other people imagine hippie Jesus hanging out on the left. And I'll tell you what, he's neither. He is not that kind of a king. Because he is a king who cares deeply about the sanctity of life, no matter what stage that's in, no matter whether that's still inside of a mother or 99 and a half years old and not contributing to society anymore. Jesus cares about the sanctity of life. And you know what? Simultaneously, he cares deeply about the poor. He cares deeply about the disenfranchised. Man, one sounds awfully right and one sounds awfully left, doesn't it? But here he is. You can't put him in a box. He's not that kind of king. You know what he is a king, though? He is a king of peace. He is a king of peace. Now you might say to yourself, Pastor Chris, this moment isn't all that peaceful. If he's a king of peace, why can't he just create peace through control or force or whatever? Because that's not how peace works. That's not how it works at all. It cannot come by force. And as we're about to see, the peace that Jesus gives, it comes at an awfully high price. And it comes outside of what any of us would consider good justice. I would love Jesus to be a king in this world right now. Just kind of fix things, like fix the economy, fix our social issues. I mean, you name it. I would love for Jesus to be here right now and just kind of through force, just be like, this is what we're doing now. It's just not who he is. It's just not. Well, let's figure out who he is. And I think you can figure out who he is. Now, let me keep going here. I think you can figure out who he is. Oh, no, don't do that. We'll leave it there. Here's how I figure out who he is. We get to look at what is said when Pilate goes back out to the crowd. Pilate looks at the crowd, and after examining Jesus, and he's already been beaten and just had a heck of a night, he comes back out, and after talking to Jesus, he says, I find no guilt in him. I find no guilt in him. You know what Pilate was really looking for, by the way? He was looking to see, is this a political king? Is this somebody who's going to exercise a coup against me? And when he finds out that Jesus is not going to do that, when Jesus says that his kingdom is not of this world, otherwise his people would be fighting for him and he wouldn't have been delivered over in the first place, he's like, okay, we're good. Because we recognize that Pilate doesn't really want anything to do with Jesus. He's kind of fed up and he doesn't really understand him. That's where that what is truth thing comes in. It's very sarcastic. If you read it that way, it's very sarcastic. Well, Pilate comes out and says, I find no guilt in him. But here's the kind of king he is. Pilate's words are echoed by God himself when he thinks about you. I find no guilt in him. I find no guilt in her because my son substituted his holiness and his righteousness for their sin and their shame. My son substituted his life. He gave it away so that they might live. And then they cry out for Barabbas. They cry out for an insurrectionist, one who is literally working against Rome. They cry out for him to be let go. You want to know why? There's something behind the curtain here. You want to know why? Because even though Barabbas is a murderer and he's violent and he's going to cause problems for the people, they can control him. They can control him. Because if they let Barabbas go and he gets out of hand, you know what you do? You pick up some torches in the middle of the night, you go find him and you kill him and you end it. They can control him. They couldn't control Jesus. They absolutely could not control the Son of God, who through miracle after miracle saved people, healed people. You can't control that. And you know what? God is asking us. He's asking for the Christian church to be uncontrollably loving, uncontrollably full of grace. I'll tell you what. I would love to work and be among you guys for the rest of my working career. But you know what I would hate to see? If I look back 25 years from now and we are just a tight-knit, controlled, conservative group of people who don't run out there and talk about Jesus to anybody who will listen to us, I will have failed you. They want Barabbas because Jesus can't be controlled, and God's church shouldn't be controlled either. God's church doesn't stay inside these walls. God's church is meant to go, to speak, to love, to give grace, to give mercy where it's undeserved, to be with the people who are going to stain you, to walk with them, to love them right where they are. You can't control that kind of movement. You think you want political change? It doesn't happen inside buildings in Des Moines and Washington, D.C. It happens right here with us. It happens inside of our community. It happens organically through being the hands and feet of Jesus, and you can't control that. That's the kind of king we have. An uncontrollable lion who roars. But he roars in his weakness. He roars on the cross. Let's pray.
Thanks for listening to ERC Sundays. To support the work God is doing at Emmaus Road Church, visit emmausroadonline.org/giving.